The sun had barely cleared the tree line when I saw the flash of white cutting across my soybean rows. I was still in the cab of my combine, easing into the first pass of the morning, when a white Mercedes came tearing through my field like it owned every acre of it. Dirt sprayed behind her tires. She didn't slow down. I barely had time to lift the header before she slammed straight into my rear tire. The sound was violent, metal crushing, glass shattering, the deep thud of impact echoing across open land. Airbags exploded inside her SUV as dust swallowed everything. Clara Whitmore, president of the Silver Ridge Estates HOA, stumbled out in designer boots, hair wild, phone already in her hand. "He's trespassing on community property," she screamed into 911 before the dust even settled. Deputy Mark Ellison was already parked along the boundary road because I'd requested standby after weeks of threats. He ordered her back. She ignored him, pointing at me like I was some criminal stealing her land. Bright orange county survey stakes lined the property. Visible. Undeniable, she knew. And she drove into my equipment anyway. As coolant bled into my soil, Clara didn't realize she'd destroyed more than her Mercedes. She had destroyed her power. I didn't know it yet, but that crash would end 16 months of harassment and uncover a secret buried in Silver Ridge's founding documents. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fenceline File Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Caleb Mercer. I'm a third-generation farmer and a widower. I own 160 acres just outside Ashford County, land my grandfather bought after returning home from overseas with nothing but calloused hands and a promise to build something permanent. My father expanded it. I maintained it. The soil here knows my name. I know every dip, every wind shift, every stubborn patch that needs extra patience in spring. For most of my life, my nearest neighbors were cattle and tree lines. That changed 5 years ago when Weston Land Group bought the adjoining property and carved it into a polished subdivision called Silver Ridge Estates. 200 homes. Curved sidewalks, decorative street lamps. A stone entrance sign that lit up at night like a resort. At first, I didn't mind it. Growth happens. People need homes. When Weston approached me about a drainage and utility easement during development, I agreed. They needed a narrow strip along my southern boundary to run underground utilities. I asked for $1 in exchange, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted the paperwork clean. In that contract, my attorney inserted a clause stating clearly that Silver Ridge Estates and its homeowners association would never have jurisdiction over my land. Ever. It was recorded with the county. Stamped. Filed. Permanent. I framed the dollar bill and hung it in my office as a quiet reminder that lines matter. Clara Whitmore moved into Silver Ridge 2 years after construction finished. She arrived from California with a polished resume and a voice that carried. Former corporate compliance officer, sharp suits, perfect posture. She joined the HOA board within months and became president by the end of the year. At first, our interactions were polite enough. A wave across the fence. A tight smile. Then the letters started. The first one mentioned visual impact concerns. Apparently my red barn clashed with the subdivision's earth tone palette. She suggested a muted gray. The second letter recommended I install privacy hedges so residents wouldn't have to look at agricultural operations. The third claimed my tractor noise violated community quiet standards on Sunday mornings. I laughed at the first few and tossed them in a drawer. I wasn't part of their HOA. Their rules stopped at their decorative fence line. Ignoring her was my mistake. Clara didn't see silence as dismissal. She saw it as defiance. Silver Ridge residents believed she was protecting their property values. She held tidy monthly meetings, distributed newsletters, talked about maintaining a cohesive community aesthetic. Most of them never questioned her authority. Why would they? She spoke with certainty. She carried binders. What they didn't see were the internal memos she began circulating within the board. I only discovered them later, but at the time she was already labeling my acreage as future community expansion opportunity. She wrote about how open farmland adjacent to a premium subdivision represented untapped recreational potential. She mentioned walking trails, A clubhouse annex. A dog park. She wrote about my land like it was already theirs. The first official escalation came in the form of a certified envelope. I remember the weight of it in my hand. The green return receipt card. My name typed in bold. Inside was a formal notice stating that my west field fell within what they called a Silver Ridge Recreational Boundary Review Zone. According to their attached documentation, the property lines were under reassessment due to historical mapping discrepancies. In simpler terms, they were suggesting that part of my field might not actually be mine. I stood in my kitchen reading that letter 3 times, feeling something cold settle in my chest. My grandfather plowed that west field with a borrowed tractor. My father planted soybeans there for 30 years. I had just seeded winter cover crops along its edge. There were no discrepancies. I drove straight to the Ashford County Clerk's office the next morning. I pulled the original deed records. I pulled the easement agreement with Weston Land Group. I requested the official survey map filed when Silver Ridge was developed. The county map was clear. My boundaries hadn't moved an inch in 70 years. Then I saw the attachment in Clara's notice again. A survey stamp from a private firm I didn't recognize. Someone had commissioned a separate survey. And they hadn't told me. I asked the clerk if any new boundary adjustments had been filed. She shook her head. Nothing official. That meant one thing. Clara wasn't correcting a mistake. She was trying to create one. I didn't plan on walking into an HOA meeting, but that certified notice pushed me there. Silver Ridge held their meetings in a glass-walled clubhouse overlooking a decorative pond. I parked my mud-dusted truck between polished SUVs and walked inside wearing my work boots. Conversations dimmed when I entered. I wasn't one of them, and they all knew it. Clara Whitmore stood at the front with a wireless microphone, posture perfect, a projection screen glowing behind her. When she saw me, her expression tightened, but she smiled like she'd been expecting it. "Caleb Mercer," she said smoothly. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" "I'm here about your boundary review zone," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Specifically the part where you're claiming my west field." A ripple moved through the room. Brian Holloway, the HOA treasurer, sat near the front clutching a folder to his chest. He looked like a man who preferred spreadsheets to confrontation. Meredith Cole, a resident accountant, leaned forward with interest. Dylan Rhodes, a contractor who'd built half the patios in Silver Ridge, crossed his arms and watched carefully. At the edge of the room sat attorney Raymond Sutter, the HOA's retained counsel, flipping through documents. Clara clicked her remote. A map appeared on the screen. "As you can see," she began, pointer in hand, "recent survey analysis indicates a potential encroachment by Mr. Mercer's agricultural operations onto Silver Ridge common use land." Encroachment. The word landed heavy. She produced a printed survey stamped by Dalton Pierce, a name I'd never heard before. "Mr. Pierce conducted a reassessment of boundary markers," she said. "His findings suggest historical inaccuracies in the original platting." I stood there and felt something inside me harden. "With respect," I said, "Dalton Pierce isn't county certified." A few heads turned. "I've already consulted with Alicia Grant," I continued, "county certified surveyor. Her markers match the original recorded deed and the development plat. The orange stakes along my west field were installed by her office last year." Clara didn't even look at me. "Private surveys are common practice when discrepancies arise," she replied coolly. "We are simply protecting community interests." "By moving my land?" I asked. Brian shifted uncomfortably. Meredith's pen paused mid-note. Even Dylan frowned. Clara clicked to another slide showing aerial images. "Mr. Mercer has continued harvesting operations in an area currently under review." "That land isn't under review," I said. "It's under my deed." Attorney Sutter finally spoke. "This matter is still being evaluated." "By who?" I asked. "The county hasn't filed anything." Clara's smile thinned. "We will proceed as necessary." That was the first public accusation. And it didn't end there. Within a week, I received a county code complaint about unsafe agricultural equipment storage. Then another report alleging my combine violated safety standards near a residential boundary. An environmental runoff complaint followed, claiming pesticide contamination risk to Silver Ridge's retention pond. An anonymous tip even accused me of using illegal chemical treatments, despite the fact I've run organic certification for years. Each time, inspectors came. Each time, they found nothing. Tom Alvarez from County Code walked my equipment yard and shook his head. "Everything's compliant," he told me. "Looks like someone's fishing." Environmental Officer Dana Kim inspected my drainage routes and soil samples. "No violations," she said plainly. "And for the record, your runoff controls are better than most subdivisions." When I asked her if she could see who was filing the complaints, she hesitated. Then she showed me the complaint log. Same originating contact. Over and over. Clara Whitmore. That was when I started documenting everything. Part, dates, times, letters, inspections. I installed 2 visible cameras near my west boundary. If someone wanted to escalate, I wasn't going to be the only one on record. Then, one morning, just before sunrise, I walked the west field as I always do before running equipment. That's when I saw them. Fresh wooden fence posts, evenly spaced, stretching in a straight line across my field, 14 feet inside my recorded boundary. They weren't decorative. They weren't temporary. They were placed deliberately. I walked to the nearest one and pressed my boot against the base. The soil around it was freshly disturbed. Whoever installed them had done it overnight. I paced from one post to the next, counting steps, measuring distance in my head against the county stakes set by Alicia Grant. The posts cut clean across soybean rows I'd planted myself. My chest tightened, not with confusion, not even with anger. With clarity. This wasn't about visual impact. It wasn't about noise. It wasn't about landscaping standards or property values. It was about land. And Clara had just crossed the line in more ways than one. The fence posts were only the beginning. Within 48 hours, Clara announced an emergency HOA meeting titled Land Protection and Boundary Integrity. The wording alone told me everything. She wasn't backing down, she was reframing the narrative. By that evening, Silver Ridge residents had received a polished email blast describing me as a non-compliant adjacent owner currently occupying land under boundary reassessment. She claimed I was resisting cooperative review efforts and jeopardizing future community improvements. My phone started buzzing. Neighbors I barely knew were suddenly experts on property law. The Silver Ridge Facebook group, which I had never even visited, lit up with speculation. Some residents demanded the board take action. Others asked why a farmer was harvesting HOA land. A few tried to defend me, but their comments were buried quickly. Clara controlled the tone, and tone becomes truth when repeated often enough. Then my cameras started paying off. Late one night, motion alerts triggered on my west boundary. I opened the footage and saw Clara's husband, Eric Whitmore, walking slowly along the property line with a flashlight and a measuring wheel. He paused at the county stake, knelt, and brushed dirt away from the base like he was looking for something hidden beneath it. 2 nights later, another alert. Her sister, Vanessa Lang, stood near my barn taking photographs from inside my boundary fence. She wasn't on the roadside, she was inside my land, stepping carefully between soybean rows. I saved every file. The next morning, I called Deputy Mark Ellison. He drove out, watched the footage in my kitchen, and exhaled slowly. "You want to press charges?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I want it documented." He drove to Silver Ridge and issued a verbal trespass warning to both Eric and Vanessa. No drama, no sirens. Just an official warning that they had no right to be on my property. Clara's response came fast. 3 days later, I received a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation for publicly mischaracterizing HOA boundary review efforts. According to the letter, my conversations with inspectors and neighboring farmers had harmed Silver Ridge's reputation. That's when I stopped handling this alone. I called Harold Bennett. Harold was in his early 70s, semi-retired, with the kind of calm that only comes from decades of courtroom battles. He had handled land disputes long before subdivisions started sprouting in Ashford County. He came out to my farm in a faded pickup and sat at my kitchen table reading every document Clara had sent. He didn't rush. He didn't react emotionally. He just read. Then he asked for a copy of the original Weston Land Group development filing. I handed him the binder I'd kept since signing the easement years earlier. Harold flipped to the recorded plat, then the easement agreement. He paused at a section near the back and leaned closer. "Well now," he murmured. He turned the binder toward me. Buried in the original filing was an indemnification clause, legal language that stated clearly, if Silver Ridge Estates or its HOA asserted jurisdiction beyond recorded subdivision boundaries, Weston Land Group would be responsible for any resulting damages, legal fees, or liability. In simple terms, if Clara pushed past her line and created a legal fight, the developer would have to pay. Harold tapped the page. "This," he said, "is leverage. Does she know?" I asked. He shook his head. If she did, she wouldn't be playing this game. That clause changed the shape of everything. It meant Clara wasn't just risking embarrassment. She was risking financial exposure for her entire community. But she didn't know that yet. Instead, she doubled down. At the next emergency meeting, which I did not attend, she declared that Silver Ridge might need to temporarily restrict access to the shared boundary road used by my equipment during harvest season. She claimed heavy machinery endangered pedestrian traffic and that the board was reviewing safety options. That road had existed long before Silver Ridge was built. My family had used it for decades, but Clara was testing something new now: access control. 2 days later, she drove out to my fence line herself. She didn't knock. She stood by the boundary, arms crossed, as I finished servicing my combine. "You understand," she called out, "that we may need to reevaluate harvest traffic through our access corridor." "It's a county road," I replied. She smiled slightly. "Shared maintenance agreements can be amended." I walked closer but stayed on my side of the stake. "You don't own my land," I said. She tilted her head. "We'll see who owns what." There was no anger in her voice this time, only certainty. And that certainty told me something important. She wasn't bluffing anymore. She believed she could force this. Up until that point, I had been reacting. Responding to letters, answering inspectors, filing reports, defending ground that had never been in question. That changed the day Harold showed me the indemnification clause. I stopped playing defense. The first thing I did was upgrade my cameras, not hidden ones, visible ones. High-definition boundary cameras mounted clearly on treated posts along the west field. If Clara wanted to claim confusion about where her land ended, I was going to make the line impossible to miss. Each camera angled slightly downward, capturing both the county stakes and the soil between them. Then I called Alicia Grant. "I need reinforcement stakes," I told her. "Bright. Frequent. Every stretch along the west boundary." She understood immediately. Within a week, her crew installed fresh, county-certified markers, fluorescent orange, tagged with official identification numbers, logged in county records. There would be no ambiguity now. Every 10 yards, a visible declaration of ownership. Next, I drove to the sheriff's office and spoke directly with Deputy Ellison. "I'll be harvesting the west field in 2 weeks," I said. "There's a high chance of interference." He nodded slowly. "You want standby?" "Yes." He didn't hesitate. "We'll be there." Then I did something strategic. I asked Brian Holloway to meet me privately. We met at a diner halfway between my farm and Silver Ridge. Brian arrived looking nervous, glancing over his shoulder like he was worried someone might see him. "I don't want trouble," he said before he even sat down. "Neither do I replied, sliding a photocopy of the indemnification clause across the table. He read it once. Then again. "If the HOA asserts jurisdiction beyond recorded boundaries," he read quietly, "Weston Land Group assumes financial liability." His face changed. "You didn't know about this, did you?" I asked. He shook his head. "Clara handles legal coordination." "How much has the HOA spent on attorneys so far?" I asked. He hesitated. I'd have to check." Check. That conversation sparked something. Within days, Meredith Cole began asking questions at board level. As an accountant, she had access to financial summaries. She noticed thousands of dollars labeled under legal consultation and enforcement. No formal vote. No board resolution, just expenditures approved under presidential authority. All signed by Clara. The numbers were climbing fast. Meanwhile, Harold contacted Weston Land Group's legal department directly. He didn't threaten. He simply asked whether they were aware that their indemnification clause might soon be triggered due to HOA boundary assertions. That got their attention. Within a week, Weston's internal counsel requested copies of Clara's correspondence. They asked for survey documentation. They asked whether Silver Ridge had filed any official boundary amendments. They hadn't. For the first time, Clara wasn't just pushing against me. She was pushing against her own developer. But she still didn't know the trap was closing. Instead, she escalated again. An announcement went out to all Silver Ridge residents. Emergency boundary enforcement meeting, Saturday at 9 a.m. The subject line included the words, agricultural encroachment response. Saturday at 9, the exact morning I planned to harvest the West Field. It wasn't coincidence. She wanted a stage. She wanted to stand in front of her residents and declare that she had stopped a farmer from stealing HOA property. She wanted a spectacle. What she didn't know was that law enforcement would already be positioned along the boundary road. She didn't know cameras would be recording from multiple angles. She didn't know Weston Land Group's legal team was quietly reviewing indemnification exposure, and she certainly didn't know her own treasurer had started documenting unauthorized spending. For the first time since this began, I felt calm, not angry, not frustrated, focused. I walked the West Field that evening as the sun dipped low, checking each reinforced stake. The soil was dry enough for harvest. The soybeans were ready. My combine was serviced. Everything was aligned. Harold came out to the farm the night before harvest. We stood near the boundary, looking at the row of bright orange stakes glowing in the fading light. She thinks public pressure will force you back, he said. She wants a show, I replied. He studied me carefully. You're certain? I looked across my land. The same land my grandfather once plowed behind a borrowed tractor. The same land my father walked every morning before sunrise. The same land Clara had tried to redraw with a private survey and a stack of letters. If she wants a public scene, I said quietly, she's going to get one. Once I decided to stop reacting and start preparing, everything moved with purpose. Alicia Grant returned to the west boundary with a two-man crew and a truck full of survey equipment. They didn't just reinforce the original stakes, they doubled them. Bright orange composite markers every 10 yards, each stamped with county identification numbers and GPS coordinates logged in the official record. She handed me a certified copy of the updated boundary verification before she left. If anyone questions it, she said, they can call my office. It won't change. The line was no longer subtle. It was a neon declaration. I adjusted my camera placements the same afternoon. One wide-angle unit mounted high enough to capture the entire field approach. Two lower units positioned to record any vehicle crossing the stakes. Another facing the shared boundary road, clearly visible so no one could claim they didn't know they were being recorded. If Clara wanted a confrontation, I intended for every second of it to be preserved. Then I called Hannah Brooks at the Ashford Chronicle. She had covered agricultural zoning disputes before and understood the difference between civil disagreement and targeted harassment. I didn't dramatize anything. I simply told her harvest would occur Saturday morning and that there had been escalating claims from Silver Ridge about land ownership. You expect trouble? She asked. I expect clarity, I replied. She said she'd send a photographer. Dylan Rhodes came by the farm 2 evenings later. He looked uneasy, hat in his hands. I owe you something, he said. We stood beside my equipment shed while the sun dropped low behind the trees. She asked me to install those fence posts, he admitted. Said it was confirmed HOA ground, told me not to worry about county markers. You knew they were inside my line, I said. He nodded slowly. 14 feet. Why'd you do it? He looked ashamed. She made it sound like a community emergency, said we'd be liable if we didn't secure it. He offered to sign a statement. I didn't push him. His quiet apology was enough. The cameras had already captured everything. Brian Holloway called me later that week. We never voted on expansion, he said quietly. There was no formal board motion. Clara classified it as administrative review. Administrative, I asked. She authorized legal spending without quorum. How much? There was a long pause. More than we should have. The fracture inside Silver Ridge was widening. Clara responded by hiring private security. 2 men in dark uniforms began patrolling near the shared boundary road in a marked SUV labeled Ridgeguard Solutions. The justification was monitoring agricultural encroachment risk. They stayed technically on subdivision property, but their presence was obvious. A message. I didn't react. The calmer I became, the more agitated she seemed. The final email arrived Thursday night. Subject line: immediate notice. Recreational parcel enforcement. The body read: harvest operations conducted on HOA recreational parcel under active boundary review will result in immediate legal action and law enforcement referral. She still referred to my Westfield as HOA recreational parcel. There had never been a park there, never been a proposal. Just soybeans stretching toward the tree line. I forwarded the email to Harold. He replied with 2 words: letter. Everything was now positioned. County stakes bright and verified. Cameras recording. Deputy Ellison informed of timing. Reporter notified. Developer's legal team quietly reviewing indemnification exposure. Internal board dissent forming. Unauthorized spending documented. Clara believed she was walking into a public assertion of authority. In reality, she was walking into documentation. The night before harvest, I fueled the combine, checked tire pressure, and walked the west boundary one last time. The air was still, the field ready. Headlights appeared along the boundary road. The white Mercedes rolled slowly past, deliberate, unhurried. Clara's window lowered halfway as she stopped near the reinforced stakes. She leaned slightly toward the open window and studied the markers, the cameras, the dark outline of my combine parked beyond them. Then she looked at me. She smiled. Not friendly, not nervous. Confident. Tomorrow, she called out softly across the field, you're done. Her window slid up. The Mercedes eased forward and disappeared down the road. I stood there a long moment after her taillights faded. The trap was fully set. She just didn't know she was the one stepping into it. Harvest morning broke cold and clear, the kind of sharp autumn air that makes sound travel farther than usual. I was already in the cab before sunrise, hands steady on the wheel, engine idling low beneath me. Deputy Mark Ellison's cruiser sat along the boundary road, lights off but visible. He leaned against the hood with a travel mug, watching the west field like he was waiting for weather to turn. Hannah Brooks stood near the fence line with a photographer, camera strap around her neck, notepad tucked under her arm. She gave me a small nod when I looked her way. She wasn't here for drama, she was here for facts. And then the residents started gathering. At first, just a few silhouettes near the subdivision entrance. Then more, arms folded. Phones out. Curiosity pulling them closer to the boundary stakes Clara had insisted were wrong. I climbed into the cab fully, shut the door, and turned the ignition the rest of the way. The combine roared to life. I eased it forward slowly, lining up for the first pass across the west field. The header lowered. Soybeans rustled under the blade. That's when the white Mercedes appeared. Clara didn't ease in. She pulled hard onto the boundary road and stopped abruptly, doors swinging open before the vehicle had fully settled. She marched toward Deputy Ellison, heels striking gravel. You need to stop him, she demanded loudly enough for everyone to hear. He's harvesting HOA property under active review. Deputy Ellison remained calm. Ma'am, the county survey has been verified. That survey is contested, she snapped. It's certified. She turned away from him and walked directly toward the bright orange stake nearest my position. Without hesitation, she stepped over it and into my field. The cameras caught every angle. I shut down the header and climbed down from the cab. You are stealing community land, she shouted at me. You've been warned. I kept my voice even. You're standing on my property, the crowd murmured behind her. Some residents looked uncertain now. The stakes were clear, the markers official. Clara pointed toward the soybeans already cut behind me. "This is HOA recreational space. There's never been a park here," I replied. Deputy Ellison stepped closer. "Ma'am, you need to return to the road." She stared at him like he had personally betrayed her. Then something changed. The anger on her face sharpened, tightened, hardened into something colder. Determination. She turned abruptly and walked back toward her Mercedes. Her steps were faster now, controlled. I watched her expression through the windshield as she slid into the driver's seat. For a split second, our eyes met. Then she shifted into drive. The engine roared. Deputy Ellison's voice cut across the air. "Ma'am, do not." But she was already moving. The Mercedes lunged off the boundary road and onto my field, tires chewing through soil, spraying dirt in a wide arc. Residents gasped. Someone shouted. I felt my body move before my mind fully processed it. I climbed back into the cab, heart pounding. She wasn't braking. She was accelerating. The white SUV tore across the soybean rows, bouncing hard over uneven ground, heading straight toward my combine. "Stop," Deputy Ellison shouted, running forward. She didn't stop. The Mercedes slammed into my rear tire with a violent crunch. Metal folded inward. The front hood buckled. Glass exploded outward in a spray of glittering fragments. The impact rocked the combine but barely shifted it. Airbags detonated inside her vehicle with a muffled blast. For a moment, everything went silent. Dust rose in a thick cloud, hanging heavy in the cold air. Bits of plastic and insulation drifted down like strange confetti. Residents stood frozen along the boundary. Phones still raised. Deputy Ellison reached the driver's side first, shouting for her to turn off the engine. The door burst open. Clara stumbled out, hair disheveled, airbag residue clinging to her blazer. Her face was flushed, not with fear, but fury. She pointed at me through the haze. "He's trespassing on HOA property," she screamed. "Arrest him." The dust hadn't even settled when another cruiser pulled in fast behind the wrecked Mercedes. Sergeant Olivia Ramirez stepped out, surveying the scene. The crushed front end of the SUV, the untouched county stakes, the combine standing exactly where it had been, and the crowd of witnesses staring in stunned silence. Clara kept shouting, "He's harvesting our land." Sergeant Olivia Ramirez didn't raise her voice. She didn't react to Clara's shouting. She didn't acknowledge the crowd. She walked first to the bright orange county stake just feet from the crushed Mercedes and knelt beside it. She read the metal identification tag aloud, then radioed the coordinates for verification. Deputy Ellison handed her a printed copy of the recorded plat Alicia Grant had certified. Sergeant Ramirez compared the GPS data on her tablet with the county filing. The numbers matched. "Exactly." She stood and turned toward me. "Mr. Mercer, do you have your easement agreement on file?" I walked to my truck and retrieved the binder Harold had told me to keep in the cab that morning. I handed it to her without a word. She flipped to the recorded document. The $1 easement. The clause stating clearly that Silver Ridge Estates held no jurisdiction beyond its platted boundaries. She read the language carefully. Then she asked Deputy Ellison for the camera footage. Within minutes, the playback showed Clara stepping over the stake, arguing, returning to her vehicle, and accelerating deliberately across the field. The angle was clear. The markers visible. No ambiguity. Sergeant Ramirez then requested the prior incident reports, the trespass warning issued to Clara Whitmore and Vanessa Lang, the dismissed code complaints, the environmental inspection logs, the documentation of fence posts installed inside my boundary. Clara tried to interrupt. "This is irrelevant. It's a pattern," Sergeant Ramirez said calmly. The crowd had gone silent. Residents who once applauded Clara's authority were now watching the slow dismantling of it. Brian Holloway stood near the front of the group, face pale. Meredith Cole clutched her phone but wasn't recording anymore. Sergeant Ramirez straightened and addressed Clara directly. "Ma'am, you drove your vehicle onto private property after being instructed not to. You struck agricultural equipment. There are multiple witnesses and video documentation." Clara laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. "Because he's trespassing on HOA land." The county survey confirms otherwise. That survey is wrong. It is certified. Clara's eyes darted to the residents as if looking for backup. None came. Sergeant Ramirez took a breath and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. You are under arrest for reckless driving, criminal mischief, trespassing, and false reporting. For a moment, Clara didn't move. Then disbelief turned to outrage. This is absurd. I am the HOA president. Not here, Sergeant Ramirez replied. Deputy Ellison stepped forward and gently guided Clara's hands behind her back. The click of handcuffs was soft, but it carried. Gasps rippled through the residence. Brian Holloway stepped closer, his voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the air. Clara, how much did you authorize in legal fees? She twisted toward him. This is not the time. How much? He repeated. Meredith stepped forward now. We've reviewed the ledger. There was no board vote. Clara's expression faltered for the first time. That was when Harold Bennett walked up beside me, binder in hand. Sergeant, he said respectfully, for the record, the original development filing includes an indemnification clause. He opened the binder and held the page where Brian and Meredith could see it. If the HOA asserts jurisdiction beyond its recorded boundaries, Weston Land Group assumes financial responsibility for damages and legal exposure. A murmur spread quickly through the crowd. Right on cue, a dark sedan pulled up near the subdivision entrance. A man in a tailored jacket stepped out. Weston Land Group's regional legal representative. He had been notified after Harold's call earlier that week. He approached slowly, glancing at the wrecked Mercedes and then at the stakes. We are reviewing this situation carefully, he said, voice measured. If the HOA has acted beyond its authority, Weston Land Group may be obligated under the recorded clause. Brian looked like the ground had shifted beneath him. Clara's campaign hadn't just created a spectacle. It had exposed Silver Ridge to financial liability. Her face drained of color as realization set in. This was about protecting property values, she insisted weakly. But even that line sounded hollow now. Residents who had once defended her stepped back. No one echoed her claim. No one applauded. No one intervened. Sergeant Ramirez began escorting her toward the cruiser. You're making the mistake, Clara shouted. I was protecting this community. Silence followed her words. Not one resident answered. Not one. The cruiser door shut with a dull thud. Dust still lingered over the field. The combine stood exactly where it had been before she chose to test steel against entitlement. I watched the patrol car pull away. Then I climbed back into the cab. I lowered the header. And I resumed harvesting. The aftermath moved faster than I expected. Clara Whitmore pled guilty within weeks. Reckless driving. Criminal mischief. Trespassing. False reporting. Her attorney negotiated suspended time and restitution for the damage to my equipment and lost harvest hours. She resigned from the HOA board before the scheduled removal vote, though it would have passed unanimously. Silver Ridge didn't stop there. Once Meredith Cole completed her review of the financial records, the numbers became impossible to ignore. Thousands of dollars in legal fees authorized without a formal board vote. Payments to private survey consultants. Security contracts signed unilaterally. The board voted to pursue civil recovery for unauthorized spending. Weston Land Group, after conducting its own review, invoked the indemnification clause. Under the recorded filing, they reimbursed the HOA for legal expenses tied directly to the boundary overreach. Their statement was careful but clear. Subdivision boundaries were fixed, and any attempt to expand them without official county revision was invalid. The message echoed through Silver Ridge. Brian Holloway stepped into the role of interim president. He wasn't charismatic, and he didn't try to be. His first announcement was simple: transparency moving forward. Board votes would be recorded publicly. Legal expenditures required majority approval. Independent audits scheduled annually. Meredith implemented structured spending oversight. No more blank check enforcement campaigns. No more unilateral actions disguised as administrative review. Dylan Rhodes came by one afternoon and apologized publicly. He admitted he should have verified the boundary before installing those fence posts. He offered to help remove them at no charge. I told him we'd call it square. Something shifted after that. The hostility dissolved, not overnight, but steadily. Without Clara's certainty driving the narrative, the residents began asking their own questions. They walked the boundary themselves. They looked at the county stakes. They saw the soil, not a future park, not a walking trail, but a working field that had been there long before their cul-de-sac. A month after harvest, I hosted a cookout near the equipment shed. Nothing fancy. Folding tables, smoked brisket, corn from the east field. To my surprise, dozens of Silver Ridge residents showed up. Kids ran along the tree line. Adults asked real questions about crop rotation and irrigation instead of zoning disputes. For the first time, they saw the land as soil, not expansion opportunity. Just earth. That winter, I updated my will. I placed the acreage into a conservation trust to ensure it would remain farmland long after I'm gone. The paperwork felt heavier than any court filing, but also more permanent. One evening near sunset, I stood at the west boundary and looked across the field. The county stakes were still there, bright against the fading light. The subdivision houses beyond them were quiet. No patrol vehicles. No measuring wheels. No emergency emails. Just wind moving through stubble. Peace doesn't come from yelling louder. It comes from knowing exactly where your lines are and letting a bully cross them in front of witnesses. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fence Line Files. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?